Grotto with Greg Hanna. Greg, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Excited to talk to Michael, our next guest.
Absolutely. We have author Michael Walsh on the program. Michael, thanks for stopping by. Your latest book, it's got to feel good it's out, right? Feel always good when you have a book come out.
Yeah, this is number 20, so it's a familiar feeling, but it's a thrill every time, let me tell you.
Do you spend how many hours a day writing if you've
All
written 20?
all of them.
All day, the whole
Well,
day you're writing.
basically, I just work. I've always since the time I was a little boy have focused on where I don't have a hobby, for example. I mean, work is my hobby. And luckily, my work takes me all over the world. I get to travel a lot. I get to meet lots of interesting people, lots of famous people, if that's a consideration. But mostly, it makes you intensely involved in your surroundings at all time. And then, as a writer, you generally work in two stages. One is you research, so you go out and do it, and the other is then you lock yourself up in a room like a prisoner in jail, and you write it all down. So those are two separate phases of it, but you're always working no matter what you're doing.
Wow. So, okay, let's talk about A Rage to Conquer. So, what sparked the rage? Was there a single moment or idea that lit the fire for that?
Yeah, well, I grew up in the Marine Corps, so I had my father, who is about to turn 99 years old,
Wow, congratulations.
and who is a veteran of the Chosin Reservoir battle that the Marines fought in the Korean War in 1950. With that kind of an upbringing, your military history is very close to you as a boy. And, you're moving around all the time too. You move from one Marine Corps duty station to another. So I did time at MCRD in San Diego, Marine Corps Recruit Depot in San Diego, a stretch in Hawaii at Pearl Harbor, Washington, D.C. on a couple of occasions because the Marine headquarters was there at 8th and I in Washington and suburban Virginia. So, it's just part of the growing up. And the book that preceded Rage to Conquer is called Last Stands, which was a big bestseller. It really resonated with people 4 years ago. And while I was writing that, I realized I had a survivor of a last stand in my own family, i.e., my dad, because as you guys probably know, the Marines were trapped way far in North Korea by a Chinese counterattack, which they were outnumbered probably 5-1 at that point, attempted to surround them in this icy, cold, mountainous terrain. And the Marines had to break out of that. It's one of the most difficult things an army can do. And they did. And why my brother and my three sisters are with us today because he was able to come back from Korea alive. But I interviewed him. So the last chapter of the previous book, Last Stands, is his first person account of what it's like to be in a last stand. And that book was very successful. And St. Martin's, my publisher, asked me for a second one. And so we decided to do Rage to Conquer. And there'll be a third one now, too, I'm happy to say.
Good.
Now, would you say from, writing this book, preparing yourself for Rage to Conquer, what was the biggest challenges, especially, the historical research that's
Yeah.
involved in writing a book like this?
Yeah. Well, the research is very intense. Research, they claim, has gotten easier these days with artificial intelligence, but uh, I don't trust it for one thing. I tried Grok the other day, and all it gave me was Wikipedia references. And if I wanted Wikipedia references, I'd write them myself and put them on Wikipedia. So I'm not sure that that's ready for prime time yet. But I like to read as a writer, obviously. What I never took a class in writing. No real writer does. You teach yourself by reading the works of everybody, and then you decide which ones you like, which ones you don't speak to you, whose technique is worth emulating. I spend a great deal of time on explaining to younger writers about technique. I'm also a concert pianist, so technique is something I've lived with since I was 5. And pianists discuss, how do you play a certain passage? First of all, technically, what is the fingering? What is the tempo? And then emotionally, what is the effect you want to have on your listener. Well, the writers do the same thing. So if you find a stylist, a great stylist, you kind of imitate that person for a while until you've learned by doing, and then you move on and you do it yourself. So a lot of research in this particular book, as you know, it goes back to Alexander the Great. I use primary sources where I can. I don't read Greek, so I have to read that in translation. But some of the Latin stuff I can read, and German I can read, and the other languages come into play as well. One of the advantages of working as I did for Time magazine for 16 years as their classical music critic and also foreign correspondent is I got to develop my language facility because I was in a different country constantly. And it's very helpful to be able to talk to people in their native language. So I speak German, for example, and when I was there during the Cold War between 85 and 91, I was mostly in East Berlin and in Moscow and in Leningrad as communism collapsed, and I had a front row seat for that. And it was a lot easier for me as someone who could easily move among the Germans without needing a translator or calling attention to yourself.
Oh, it came in handy.
It did, yes.
Yeah,
Lucky break for me.
definitely. So let's say Rage to Conquer gets adapted into a film. Who would you personally want to cast as the lead?
Well, there's no lead in it. You know, it's 12 different battles. So it's, and so as someone who works in Hollywood, oddly enough, I don't see this book becoming a film. The only way it would is if we took individual stories and turned them into scripts or a limited mini series or something like that. And there has been talk of that, but there's always talk of everything in Hollywood. I think writers don't get to cast their movies. I mean, no movie that I've written uh, have I ever been consulted in casting for, except before it gets sold. So that we play a game in Hollywood that writers like to call fantasy casting, where you'll sit around with an executive and say, well, who do you see as this character and who do you see as that character? And it really doesn't matter because none of that will ever happen. It's a fun game to play, but it's funner after they've bought the script and you're not doing it for free. So that is a rare occasion these days, especially Hollywood has changed so much. Now, when I first went there around, what was it, early 2000s, you could still sell what we call spec scripts for a lot of money. I had a friend who made fortunes selling spec scripts, $2, $3, $4, $5, $6 billion a pop. And one of them got made into probably one of the most famous movies in the history of our lifetime, but I won't mention it so I don't give his name away. But he did extremely well because that movie not only got sold big, but it was an enormous success. But that doesn't happen anymore. The studios don't want to read scripts. They hate scripts, actually. It's just too bad that they're inconvenienced by them because you kind of need one. As the recent Snow White movie just proved, obviously. But writers have been discounted from the beginning in Hollywood, even though they're necessary. And now they're not even necessary anymore. Agents won't even look at a spec script because they know nobody will make it and no actor will sign on to it. Unless everything is already financed and set, no one's going to move a muscle.
Hmm.
So
why do you think is they don't read scripts anymore? Why does Hollywood not read scripts?
well, they never like to read scripts, and script reading is something executives don't like to do. Uh, Traditionally, they would take them home in a bundle on weekends and read the first 10 pages to see if they grabbed them, and then put it away and move on. But now that, you know, Disney especially has taken over this market and streaming has taken over the market, which has changed everything. But they have a product they want to produce. We're going to do X number of Marvel movies per this time slot. And so they just get turned out like sausages in a sausage factory. And they're not very good. And they've hit the law of diminishing returns on these wretched superhero movies. And wokeism is dead. And so that's why Snow Woke is dead. But it takes, you know, 2, 3 years between conception and realization. I did a movie for Disney way back in early 2000s for the Disney Channel called Cadet Kelly, which was about a little girl who goes to military school. It was the biggest hit they ever had in the history of the Disney Channel or in the history of the Disney uh, original movies at that time. Now they wouldn't even, well, they wouldn't think about it. For one thing, it's military and it has guns in it and it's scary and uh, all sorts of things. But you could still come up with a fresh idea, take it to an executive and sell it and then write it and get paid, which is what the model used to be. That's now pretty much gone, unfortunately. That's why the movies are so bad.
Mm.
Interesting. You know, Greg, when I think about it, and specifically, and I'll throw another question to Michael, but I'm going to get your feedback too, Greg. The problem is, I mean, right, this is the writer's dream to what Michael's talking about, but it sounds like that dream is very difficult, Greg, is what we're hearing from Michael.
Yeah,
That
that's
they,
me
they write a
too.
book, they write a book and want to make it a movie. It
Me
looks,
too.
or a series. That's everyone's dream, Michael, by the way. You know that.
I guess I don't think of it that way. Maybe because I do scripts and books quite separately from each other. They're different creatures for one thing. It takes different skills to write them for another. So there's a vast difference between, oh, there's a movie I've got which is set during the Cold War, for example, in Berlin, which is something obviously I experienced. But that's a very different kind of writing than if I decided to make that a novel or if I decided to write a history of the end of the Cold War as a nonfiction book. So different, you know, apples and oranges really is what it is. It used to be you could a lot of amateur writers thought, well, my dream is to get my novel published, and then it'll get optioned, and then they'll make it into a movie, and I'll be rich and famous. That pretty much never happens. So I'm curious to know how that dream got started because it almost never happens. Now, one day there are miracles. One day uh, I went to Hollywood just because I was suddenly summoned there by one of the most powerful agents in the world at that time who had seen this very thing, a partial manuscript of a novel I wrote. Next thing I knew, I was on a plane, and the next thing I knew, this movie was sold and set up, and I found myself at a dinner party with a bunch of executives from Paramount, and one of them said to me, "How did you get in the industry?" And I said, "Well, one day I was sitting around and my phone rang, and it was so and so, and he said, 'Get on a plane.'" And the guy looked at me and said, "That never happens." And I said, "I know, but it did actually happen to me," which was actually the worst thing in the world for me because it made me think this was going to be very easy. And it's not easy. It's extremely difficult and frustrating and requires a great deal of stick-to-itiveness. What they say about Hollywood writers, at least in those days, you either had to come out there rich or be willing to live in your car in the valley for as long as it took for you to make that first sale. So it's a tough racket. Now it certainly used to be very well remunerated if and when you got the deal, and when you know whether or not the movie was made or not is not the writer's consideration. It's just selling the script that we care about. Uh, but that's all changed now. Now it's the studios are basically banks, and the streaming services, the deals you make with them are financially very, very different than what you would have made with the studio. And they're bad too, is the point. So someone said, your agent calls you up and he says, the good news is we sold your movie to Netflix. The bad news is we sold your movie to Netflix. And that's the truth because there's no back end. So for example, you write a movie and it's an enormous hit, you get what are called monkey points in the business. Writers get monkey points, actors get real points, but they're percentages of the net. Well, there's never a net on a movie. Every movie loses money. No matter the Titanic lost money. They all lose money because the accountants are paid to show that. So the writer never gets anything, but you sometimes do get something on the back end. Whereas if you sell to a streamer, they buy it and that's it. It's gone, the end. You'll never see it again. So it becomes, like I said, a sausage factory rather than an artistic collaboration that was very exciting and very rewarding. And that's all changed now.
Hmm.
Well, if you could sit down at dinner with any author, living or gone, who would you pick, and what would you be asking them?
Well, someone I actually know, which is James Ellroy. Um, I met Ellroy ages ago. We were signing autographs at the Fifth Avenue Book Fair. My first novel just come out, and James had really just become a very famous American writer. And I just admire him tremendously. He's the only writer for whom I will stop what I'm doing and read his new book when it comes out. I don't do that for anybody else because I have so much of my own reading that I have to do, both fiction and nonfiction. But I think Ellroy is absolutely brilliant. He's American original and total one-off. That's the answer to that question.
Michael, what films have you gotten made into movies? I mean, books, I mean, screenplays you've written and stuff like
Well,
that.
again, it's not a real metric because writers don't, that's not how we count. We write. So the question is, how many scripts have you sold is the question. Because whether they get made or not is entirely up to the gods of the motion picture business. You'll have, I don't even want to think about how many projects have fallen through at the last minute. You've got to get the attachments, you've got to get the director, you have to get the financing, none of which is my job. None of which is my job. So my job is to write the best script I can write, that my agent makes me the best deal he can make, and then it's entirely up to them. So that's how the writing racket in Hollywood works. Now it's very different in books, very, because you work closely with an editor. I have a wonderful editor at St. Martin's, and you talk it through with him or her. You write a proposal, and I still have to write proposals, not the way I might have when I was a beginning writer, but I lay it out. Here's what you're going to get, more or less. You know me, you published me for years. And then you work very closely with him or her, and they will give you an overall edit of the book. That's not, hey, you misspelled the. It's I don't think this chapter works. Scrap it and start over again. And I mean, that's the A to Z of the book editing business. And a great editor only deals with the Z part, or perhaps that's the A part. I don't think this chapter works. Start over again, which happens all the time. And you want that to happen because you don't want anything less than your best work in public. And your editor will save you from making a fool of yourself time and again. So we love editors.
Interesting. What's a message or feeling that you're hoping, the reader will carry away with them after finishing Rage to Conquer?
Well, I think with these two military books, to get caught, well, there's a couple of things. One is to get caught up in the story, because these are all great battles, and especially for young men to read, because they say men don't read anymore, and that's partly because publishing has been taken over by radical feminists to a distressing extent, and so they've as in all aspects of our society, they pushed men and boys away. This notion of toxic masculinity and all this stuff. But I want the boys that read this, and the women who love them, to get caught up in the adventure. What did this man or a group of men, and it's always men, how did they react to an existential threat situation or desire for some kind of immortality? So Alexander's a good example of this. He wanted immortality, he got it. Caesar, remember, Caesar was a middle-aged, balding, fat guy when he started his military career. He's very, very unusual. He wasn't a young, studly soldier like Alexander was, or Napoleon, but he was balding famously, and he was very sensitive about that. So to all guys who are losing their hair, it was okay. Work for Caesar, it can work for you too. He was middle-aged. He was in his 40s when he went off to conquer Gaul. And that took 10 years, remember? And he came back in his 50s. And then they, of course, murdered him because for lots of reasons. But the lives of these guys are so interesting, and they have lessons to tell young men, especially, who don't have role models, who have been stripped systematically of their role models for the last 20 years. So I joke that both these books are in praise of toxic masculinity. And I think that a lot of women agree with me that we're all like Colonel Jessup in A Few Good Men. You know, the writer of that, who's famous lefty, thought he was writing the Jack Nicholson character as the villain. And he was stunned that everybody thinks Jack Nicholson is actually the hero of that movie. And it's that whiny little Tom Cruise bitch who's giving him trouble about the code red and otherwise annoying him. But that famous speech about you want me on that wall, you need me on that wall, really is the articulation of toxic masculinity at its finest. And it is when a civilization loses that, it dies. Simple as that. There is no feminist civilization that can survive without toxic masculinity. Otherwise, it will be taken over almost instantaneously by a younger, tougher, meaner, maler culture. It just will.
Wow. Greg, that's awesome to lead to your final question. He asked all our celebrities, Michael, this question. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's been great to meet you, Michael.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So mentoring moment now. Tell me, what do you feel is the most important thing in life you've ever learned?
Don't give up. Simple. You're going to get rejection. Rejection is not bad, it is good. Doesn't feel good, but it's good. I'm 75. I've had a heart attack. I've had an internal hemorrhage. I've had the last rites of the Catholic Church. But I never stop working. You get right back up off the horse that threw you, and you get back on until the day comes when you can't. I think giving up is you might as well just dig your own grave and jump in it, because what's the purpose of life? I think for men especially, men are very goal oriented. You know, it's certainly a primal sex distinction. We project outward in literally everything that we do, and women don't. And Camille Paglia, who's a hero of mine, has written so effectively about this. She's a little bit older than me, but I think she's one of the most brilliant Americans, certainly of the 20th century. I think don't give up. Just keep on going. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, when you're surrounded by 100,000 Chinese, you really have no choice. And I think my dad's lesson, I'll finish with this, is appropriate. I said to him the night that they attacked, and the Chinese came down the hill, and they have these gongs and trumpets, and they make this hell of a racket, which was like the Confederate war cry or the Celtic war cries, meant to intimidate the opponents. The Romans, interestingly enough, fought in total silence. They were not scared of anybody, and they didn't say a word. They just ran right over you. So I said, were you ever scared? And he looked at me like I was crazy. And he said, no, we just went to work, which was defending ourselves from being killed in 35 below zero weather. But that's it. That's how a man thinks. And I think that's the message of these two books in particular.
All right. We can pick up the book, all finer bookstores available. You check out the independent bookstores, and also check out St. Martin's Press, who is your publisher. And we appreciate it, Michael. Is there a place people can follow you?
Yes, there is. I'm on X a lot, at the amanuensis. An amanuensis is a joke. An amanuensis is someone who writes on behalf of somebody else. It's an inside joke, but that's what I got stuck with. And I've just re-established my website called the-pipeline.org. We do a lot of work about the energy industry, but we deal with all the political events of the time. And I'll be doing a weekly column there, plus a semi-monthly interview with somebody in my Rolodex, which will be very interesting because I've met so many people over the course of my 50 years in this racket. So So we just resumed that as of yesterday. So the-pipeline.org, and on Substack as well.
All right. Appreciate it, Michael.
Okay, thanks, guys.
That
Thank
was
you.
a special simulcast Neil Haley Show and celebrity interviews live from the Grotto with Greg Hanna. Guys, take care.